more or less speak to our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Hello to you, Doug.
How are you, William?
Let's see, what has the biggest impact of this conflict been on this looming ballot and the campaigning for it?
Well, before I answer that, did you even remember there was a French presidential election? Because
we're less than a month away, and it's completely off the radar.
We're 23 days away from the first round of the two-round presidential election, and you could forgive a lot of French for almost forgetting that they were about to elect or perhaps re-elect a president. Macron himself, he announced his candidacy in a sort of unconventional way. He did it on March 3rd in a formal letter to the French people rather than some sort of campaign event. And so this low-profile way, because he was in the midst of sort of the commander-in-chief role, right? The Russian invasion was February 24th. He was already more than a week into his sort of mediator's role, trying to, do the phone mediation with Vladimir Putin, trying to rally Europe to the occasion. So he literally, in his letter, warned the French. He says, given the current geopolitical context, I'm sorry, I'd love to be able to go out there and campaign more. I just don't have the time. I can't do it right now. And that's essentially what we've gotten. We've gotten an invisible sort of campaign. Yes, we have 12 candidates in the race. Before February 24th, yes, you did have, a semblance of campaigning, at least among, those candidates, a lot on the far right, a lot on the far west, often dominated by headlines about security and immigration and law and order, so on and so forth. Since then, it has been Ukraine all the time. I want to show our viewers a graph, a sort of a chart that really shows, you asked me about the impact of the fact that we are in this war context right now. Look at this. Macron was already in a relatively solid lead before the Russian invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. He has gained ground. That is, he has put more distance between himself and his closest rivals, nipping at his heels. Not really nipping there. Marine Le Pen, the far-right nationalist, standard bearer, if you will, she is, more than 10 points behind him. And then, the rest of the pack, Éric Zemmour, far-right firebrand, 13%, 12.5% for Mélenchon on the far left here. Macron is solidly in a lead, and because this is a two-stage election, you can almost say that for a lot of French, the elections become boring. And what I mean by that is there's almost this built-in assumption, of course, polls can be wrong, of course, we can all be proven wrong, and then he could defy the odds, that he will end up in the second round, will be Macron against someone, and it's shaping up to be perhaps Macron-Le Pen. As of now, a poll today shows that if it is Macron versus Le Pen, which would be a rematch, essentially, of the last election, he would win by 58% of the vote to her 40 to her less than about around 40%. So you have a very lopsided race so far, and a race in which you have not had a lot of the traditional type of campaigning you might see from a president seeking re-election. Like you said, that event yesterday, which was 1 hour and a half of talking, followed by about 2.5 hours of Q&A. That was really his only campaign event. And that was with journalists. It wasn't with other candidates in a debate.
No, we're looking at that list of the other candidates.
Yeah.
Some of them have vilified NATO. Some of them have cozied up to the Kremlin. Are they changing their positions now?
They are. They're trying to do either U-turns or partial flip-flops or softening their tone. The two issues are this. 3 out of the top 5 candidates here, Marine Le Pen, Éric Zemmour, Jean-Luc Mélenchon have been staunch, and I underline staunch, critics of NATO, of the Western Alliance.
The first two on the far left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon.
Exactly, first two on the far right, and Mélenchon on the far left. Staunch critics of NATO and the Western Alliance. NATO bashers, really, in almost a Trumpian mode, if you will. And you could see that that's not quite the flavor of the day right now, when NATO is really having a second lease of life because of the Ukrainian war. And it is, there's a spring in Europe step again, and all these global issues are back at the fore that had been totally ignored, not at all on the candidates' radar, really, before February 24th, or very little. So they're having to revise their positions a little, but also, more importantly, cozying up to Vladimir Putin. 2 of those candidates, Marine Le Pen and Éric Zemmour. Marine Le Pen, she supported the annexation of Crimea in 2014. She has openly admired Vladimir Putin in the past. She has refused to call for the release of the Russian opposition jailed figure Alexei Navalny. All of this. Éric Zemmour has gone even further. He has said he hopes to see a French Putin. He said this in the past. And he has basically called Putin the last resistance against the storm of political correctness. Now, I have to, disclaimer, those were in the past. They have changed or adjusted their opinions. Marine Le Pen says she has partly changed her opinion. They're trying to do everything to put as much distance between themselves and Vladimir Putin right now as they can. Jean-Luc Mélenchon never embraced Putin. He never openly admired him. What he has been is non-aligned, meaning neither pro-Putin or pro-Ukraine in this conflict. He says France should remain neutral. That is construed by a lot of voters being non-aligned as essentially throwing your support, your backing behind Putin. While Mélenchon will vehemently deny that's the case, that's the way it is seen by a large part of the electorate. These are complicated issues. What they have done is playing to Macron's advantage. He's always had a very central message on Europe, European sovereignty, greater European defense, and putting an emphasis more on NATO. And all of those issues have come to the fore and have played to his advantage, which may partially explain why we see him gaining that ground in the polls right now.
And Doug, what other ways has the war in Ukraine impacted this campaign?
Well, look at just one issue, the refugees issue, right? There are now 3 million and counting refugees who have, an exodus really, who have fled Ukraine for nearby countries and countries further west in Western Europe. And you also have millions displaced within Europe. Now, immigration and security, I said early on, were big themes, and they were often used as cudgels by the far right, bashing immigrants, law and order in the inner cities and all of that. They've had to all soften their tone on immigration. Varying degrees, all now favorable to accepting immigrants, bowing to the reality that these are people literally fleeing for their lives from a horrific war. You can't exactly slam the doors shut. That's one thing that this has been a wake-up call to Europe on the refugee question. There is one candidate who has managed to sort of buck that trend. It is Eric Zemmour, the far-right firebrand, who is now polling third right now, according to that poll I showed you. He has basically said that those refugees, Ukrainians, they should go to Poland. Poland's the closest country. It's where the women and children could presumably be closer to their men who are fighting next door in Ukraine on the battlefield. Says France doesn't have the capacity to accept them and really should be the very last resort. Zemmour dislikes all refugees, to really boil it down to its essence. But he actually said recently that if or the lesser of evils, he prefers Ukrainian refugees to the others. He said that Ukrainians are Europeans and Christians, unlike those who come from Afghanistan or Syria, who are from a totally different civilization that are not our own. Very difficult issue here.
And very controversial remarks throughout this campaign. All right. Thank you very much, Doug. Douglas Herbert, our international affairs commentator.